Let's start creating some geometry in AutoCAD. We'll start with the line command. Of course, we can simply click to establish the endpoints of a line, but that's not very precise. It's going to be very, very difficult to draw a precise line by using mouse clicks. So instead of that, let's undo the line I just created, and let's do it a little bit differently. I'll go ahead and click for the first point of my line because I really don't care where the line is in space. But this time I want the line to be exactly 2 inches long and at a 45-degree angle. This would be using polar coordinates. To do that, note that my length of my line is highlighted. I can simply type 2. I can use the tab key to move over to the angle designation. I can type 45 and press enter. Now I have a line that is exactly 2 units long and at a 45-degree angle. I can verify that using the measure tool. Click measure, click both endpoints, and you'll notice that the line is exactly 2 inches long, and because the X and Y components are equal, it is exactly at a 45-degree angle. I can also use relative coordinates in X and Y. So let's say I want to draw a line that is exactly horizontal. I'll click the start point of the line, and I want it to be a length of 2, comma, and then I enter 0 for the Y component. Note that I could have done this with polar coordinates by entering a length of 2 and an angle of 0. Let's continue the line, and we'll go ahead and draw a parallelogram. So again, I want a length of 2, tab, and I want this angle. Right? Notice that I would enter 135 here to get the proper angle. Now we could, of course, use relative coordinates to close our figure precisely, but you've also probably noticed these little green boxes that show up whenever I hover my mouse near the end point of a line. These are called object snaps in AutoCAD, and they're used to precisely put geometry where it needs to be. So if I hover my mouse button until I get the green box, I can be assured that the endpoint of this line I'm drawing is precisely co-located with the endpoint of the first line I drew. I'll left click to finish and right click to exit the command. There are also midpoint snaps. So let's draw a line from the midpoint of this line to the midpoint of this line. Now you'll notice I'm not getting a midpoint snap. So I hold down my right mouse button, select Snap Overrides. Again, I still have my right mouse button down. Move to midpoint and release my mouse button. Now when I hover near the midpoint of a line, I get a green triangle. This is the midpoint snap. So I will use the midpoint snap to start my line, and again I will use the midpoint snap to finish my line. If you need to delete geometry, it's fairly simple. There's a couple of ways to do it. One is the erase command. Click erase, and then select the objects that you want to erase. So if I select this last line I drew, and then I right click, that line goes away. I'll undo that erase You can select multiple objects when you erase. For example, I might want to erase this line, and this line. Right-click or press Enter, and those lines are deleted. I'll undo to show you another method. You don't need to use the erase command itself. You can simply select geometry, one line or multiple lines, whatever you wish. Once you've selected what you want to remove, simply hit the delete key on your keyboard. Undo one more time. You can also select multiple objects at once using your mouse. So, for example, I can draw a loop around my entire figure, and that'll select all the lines in my figure. Hit Escape to unselect. It matters which way you draw your loop. So, for example, if I draw a loop in the clockwise direction, notice that only the geometry that was entirely within the loop is selected. Now I'm going to try to draw approximately the same loop in a counterclockwise direction. This time, any geometry that is partially inside the loop will be selected. Let's move on to creating circles. There are several ways we can use geometry to define a circle. We can use the center and the radius of the circle, center and diameter. We can specify 2 or 3 points. We can specify tangents and radii. Let's start with center radius. Here I will click to establish the center, and then I will type in my radius. So let's say I want a radius of 1. Enter on the keyboard, and now I have a circle of radius 1. We can check that with the measure command, and you can see we do have a radius of exactly 1. We can also double-click geometry to get information about it. So I'm going to double-click the circle with my left mouse button, and I get basic data about the circle. Where is its center? What's its radius? What's its diameter? What's its circumference and its area? Of course, we can create circles other ways. I'll demonstrate the tangent radius. I can specify I want my circle tangent to this line, tangent to this line, and then I'll set my radius at, say, 0.25. Enter. And I get a circle of radius 0.25 tangent to these two lines. As before, if I want to delete, I delete circles just like I delete lines. And you can experiment with the different forms of the circle. Another nice feature of AutoCAD is whenever you hover over a command, not only do you get some brief explanation, but if you press F1 while you're hovering over that command, it'll take you directly to the help for that command. A few more geometry options. You can draw arcs. As with circles, you can define an arc in many different ways. You can create polygons. There's a special rectangle command, and then another polygon command. One thing to note about creating rectangles and polygons this way is that AutoCAD creates them as a block or one piece of geometry. So notice whenever I try to select this upper line of the rectangle, the entire rectangle is selected. I can't select one particular line. If you want to change that, you can use the explode command. simply click on Explode, select the object, right-click, and while it doesn't look like anything has changed, if I go to select this line again, now I can select and, let's say, delete that particular line. There's also an ellipse command with various options for defining it. You can experiment with the arc, polygon, and ellipse commands on your own. There's also a text command. There are two options for text, multi-line and single line. We will stay with multi-line text for this course. Simply activate the command, drag a window where you want the text to exist, click, and you're ready to start typing. You can modify the size of that window. Also notice whenever you're in that text window, the text editor ribbon comes up. And this is where you can do things like change the size of the font. Bold, font sizes, justification. We'll center that. Again, feel free to explore the text editor on your own. When I'm done, I'm going to press Escape. And now I have my text. If I want to go back and edit or modify that text, I can simply double-click. Double-clicking on that takes me back into my text editor and gives me my text editor ribbon. Let's do an example that uses some of the tools we've just learned. I have some geometry drawn here. It's just a plate with two holes in it. And I've added some dimensions so that we know exactly how big or what size to draw our geometry. So we'll start by creating a line. And I want this line to be exactly 3 inches long in the X direction. So I'll do 3 at an angle of 0 and press enter. And I want this line to be 2 inches long in the vertical direction. So I'll enter 2 at an angle of 90. Of course, I can also do this with relative coordinates. So for example, this line, we want it to be 3 units long. And then I'll hit comma and enter 0 for the y dimension. Of course, that gave me a line in the wrong direction. This will happen as you use AutoCAD. Not really that difficult to get around. Just escape to get out of the command. Delete the line and try again. So in this case, we'll do a length of 3 at an angle of 180. There we go. And then I'll close the rectangle by using the endpoint object snap. Now we have the dimensions of our plate. We need to go ahead and put our circles in. The problem we have, though, is how do we locate that circle accurately? Well, there's a couple of ways to do it. Let's do it by creating a construction line. We know that the center of this circle is 1 inch from this edge and 1 inch from this edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a line from this corner, and then I'm going to use relative coordinates. I want to go 1 unit in the X, comma, 1 unit in the Y. Enter. Now I can use the endpoint of this line to draw my circle. So I'm going to use circle by specifying center and diameter. Use the object snap to find the center of the circle, and then type the diameter, which is 0.5, and press enter. Now I have my circle. To set the second circle, I can draw another construction line. From that endpoint, 1 unit at an angle of 0 degrees, and create my other circle. And then when I'm done, I can simply delete my construction lines, and I have my figure. Of course, there's lots of other ways to think about this. Let's do the example again. This time, I'm going to use the rectangle command. I'll set the first point of my rectangle, and then again I'll use relative coordinates to specify the opposite corner. So this needs to be 3 units in the x direction, comma, 2 units in the y direction. There. Now I have my rectangle. Thinking about construction lines a little bit differently, let's this time draw a line from the center point, a distance of 1 unit in the x direction. So I start my line, use my right mouse button to get my midpoint snap, click, and then draw a line that is 1 unit long at 0 degrees. Now I draw my circle, and I can do the same thing again. Draw my other circle, delete my construction lines, and there we have our geometry again. There's really no right or wrong way to draw geometry. It all comes down to how you think about the figure and what sort of geometric tools and geometric logic you use to create it. Ultimately, if you wind up with the right figure, it's right. Let's double check to make sure that we got our figure right using the measure command. I can measure from the corner to the corner of the rectangle, and I confirm that yes, it is 3 units in the x, 2 units in the y. I can measure from corner to the center of the circle, verify that it is in fact in the right place, and I can measure from the center of the circle to the center of the circle, verify that the second circle is in the right place, and I can double click one of these circles to verify that I in fact have the right diameter.